what I'm going to talk about is, blockchain is, as a technology, obviously is nothing new. Some of you guys may have heard about it. So our story started actually a couple of years ago, about 10 years ago, when we were doing a project in Australia. We were renewing actually the SDH-based transport network for a media company in Australia, which happens to be the biggest one. So, and the automation piece which we did there was similar to what we are talking about today all day long. They didn't have NFV by then, but obviously we had a lot of different technologies. And if you are familiar with the broadband broadcast domain, the multi-technology, multi-vendor, multi-technology is a big challenge. It's a bigger challenge actually from what I see, from what I saw compared to telecom. So we talked about transformation, and the title is about ecosystem to ecosystem. Actually, the reason why we started this journey is because of this project we did then. And the reason why Australia is big and you wanted to do the port sharing across multiple customers, you don't have to install every now and then a new port or a new device. You do share it. So that's the whole idea. Later we took, as part of the automation, obviously. And later we took the same technology, we deployed it actually at AT&T. So every now and then, if you're watching NHL, NFL, the Super Bowl, the automation behind it is the software we deliver. So we have some experience with automation. We understand that automation is not that easy. Actually, 60% of the automation pieces we've experienced during 10 years ago and now were failing because of the lack of inventory. It was not so much the orchestration piece, it was the inventory, the precise inventory data which we didn't have. So that was, where we came up with a solution which we have presented in the market. So that's a quick intro, and how does it fit into the blockchain? So the blockchain piece is really the key differentiator for us when we start seeing, sharing of resources across multiple, as was indicated, alluded during the proof of concept last year at MEF. Those are the things which can be done easily now. So a couple of things. Telecom, as usual, is very easy to manage, so it's nothing new. We know that when Google talks about how they can manage network easily and provision services within a couple of days, and they have a good approach to explaining it, not only marketing-wise, but also technology-wise. And they do the telecom bashing, rightfully so maybe, sometimes, but they don't have the complexity of the network which we face actually in the telecom space. So historically, if you look at the landline, the transport network or landline networks, in the past, it was grown over time from SDH, ATM, to newer technologies. So, you cannot rip up the system, the running system, if you're in a brownfield environment and replace it with SDN easily. So that's why when some of the service providers, especially in the US, talking about achieving by 2020 75% of virtualization, that is to be discussed. Somehow questionable. Sometimes it's not feasible, but the good marketing makes it happen. So the digital transformation is, for us, as Brandon was talking about from Forward Networks yesterday, is not, just the intent base. It doesn't start for us in the telecom space, telecom network. It's also part of the customer experience. So when we talk about end-to-end orchestration, end-to-end automation, that's where we see a lot of potential for customer experience. That's where we take the customer experience intent, what they want to do, take it all the way to the network. That's what we are focusing on most of the time. And, again, operations, I kind of disagree with what Anup says. I hope we get to that point where we have the full-blown automation in such a way that operation can actually keep up with the changes. But typically, the bottleneck is always the operation. So if you have the latest and greatest features, you have freezes, a lot of things are happening, which is part of CI/CD. So DevOps is, as Saad was also saying, is nice to have, but, maybe in the future. So a couple of items we are facing and challenges in the telecom space, starting with NFV, SDN, and cloud. So let me start with this NFV, which is probably the topic most of you guys have been talking about this morning. So NFV, I went once to a customer in the United States, potential customer, and they said to me, we have about 4,000 NFV deployed. And then I asked the question, why am I actually here? Because if you have already managed or figured out how to manage 4,000 NFVs, there is no need to discuss. As a matter of fact, the problem is really not spinning up NFV. Everyone can do NFV, write a YAML code. That's not masterpiece. Is operationally maintaining NFVs is really the biggest challenge, right? So, and the same meeting, the same token, actually, one of the guys was telling me that one of the EC2s went down and they lost all the 911 calls for a period of 4 hours. So that is kind of a reality when you lose NFV, you lose it pretty much badly. The second thing is when we talk about cloud native, and again, we are in telecom space very good in buzzwords and creating. We haven't just finished the NFV stuff. We start talking about the native architecture and cloud native. So one of the issues we are facing is security, and I think Egosystem is talking about security this afternoon. What we see is, as far as DDoS goes, distributed attacks. 70% of the time, we know within 3 to 5 hours what's going on actually in the attack. So we don't figure out what's going on. And every hour in enterprise market costs us about $300,000. Obviously, in telco space, if you can do the math, how much more that would be. Losing all the applications, if you're going truly to a native cloud, that's going to be a challenge. So, and the other statistics Cisco published is about 54%, I think, of the happened incidents in terms of DDoS attacks or cybersecurity attacks are the ones we capture, out of which only 37% are actually legit, attacks, out of which only we can cover 50%. So that tells you how bad the security is, and I think one of the reasons why Amazon, Google, and Facebook are, because they are digital native and they're coming from the IT native domain, they understand it's not that Google doesn't get any security threats or security attacks. They get it on a daily basis, but they have the potential means to deal with it, and that's the difference between, I think, some of the our friends in the telco side versus the hyperscale companies. So having said that, I think the notion that automation is a mandatory thing, I think, is something we don't have to discuss. In the telco space, we are dealing still with, for 10,000 devices, 300 engineers. That's what we need today. Whereas in hyperscale companies, the number is 3. So that's a 25 billion difference between operations. So in order to catch up, and I'm not saying from telco side or from the other side, if you want to really catch up and be substantial and having something to say in the future of the telecom business, I think we need to wrap up our business and effort and get to the automation piece. So network transformation, again, we talk about a lot, and I think we don't have to explore even more. Everyone knows how wonderful a scenario with SDN and NFV would be, but again, in practical sense, if you don't take care of the existing legacy networks, that's the challenge we face on the telecom side. On the hyperscale company side, those issues don't exist because they were just lucky enough to start late in the business. So the same thing happens with mobile. If you look at the mobile OSS stack, is a lot more sophisticated than compared to the traditional OSS. So the network transformation, as Saad and Anup were saying, spinning up NFV is wonderful. Getting operationally the stuff up and running also good. But how to maintain this over time, and what is the pace of innovation in network operations center versus customer care? Because customer, the next generation, the Z Gen generation, they don't wait for services to come up. They just easily switch to the next provider. So the finger click, they can decide which service provider they can choose. So that's a competition service providers are up against. The other thing was mentioned, I think, yesterday, unstructured versus structured data. Actually, I personally, and we don't believe that we are facing only structured data in the networks. Networks are human-made and human-controlled at the end, and customers are, using other applications. Again, in statistics, interesting enough, about unstructured data, 70% of C-level believe that they have less than 10% unstructured data in their networks or in their data centers. Whereas in reality, more than 50% have 70% already unstructured data. That's all email, Twitter accounts, everything which comes from the customer can be considered as a on unstructured data. So here's an example of Messi, probably one of the greatest football players in the world. For my European friends, for American friends, if you don't know him, he's playing soccer for you guys. So on the right-hand side, Brady is the best quarterback probably we have seen here in the United States. So he's, if you compare the structured data versus unstructured data, Messi is, this is the heat map on the left-hand side, where and how he's running, versus Brady's structured, relatively structured. I'm not saying this is exclusive, but sometimes something happens, fumbling of the ball and everything. But this is the reality. So, and that's what we see actually in network. That's why I believe firmly, talking about machine learning, and this is kind of my background, is if you're talking about machine learning, deep learning, we're talking about probably Python. If you're talking about AI, this is probably a PowerPoint presentation. So that's the difference what we see right now in the market. A lot of marketing guys, Microsoft, I'm sorry to say that Microsoft is leading the chart with their wonderful ads, and IBM the same thing. They are doing a fantastic job of making it happen, but also the marketing message is, you just have to turn it on. I mean, the data we have to get to in order to get to that point is really difficult. So that's why, and again, I did 20 years ago my PhD on machine learning. I know a little bit about the whole thing. I gave up because we didn't have the data and computer power by then. So now the notion is changed completely. So how that relates to blockchain, I will explain later. So the next thing, again, we are good on buzzwords and new technologies. Container, if you talk about any service provider today, they're probably talking about, Kubernetes, Kubernetes this, Kubernetes that, and then if Kubernetes is gone, the next one is Istio. So everyone is now talking about Istio, how wonderful Istio would be, there's going to be service mesh here, service mesh there. So the question is, how dynamic are we? How dynamic are we in terms of network operations, in terms of services? I think no one debates that service mesh is a good thing. The question is, do we really need it for everything we do in a daily operation in the telecom space? So again, containerized virtualization, that's a debate right now going on. And I don't think we have the right answer. VMware was the one who was actually pushing for virtualization. Now everyone is talking about container and microservices simply because we don't want to pay the extra charges for VMware platform. RPA, and that's the part actually I was talking about, the customer and customer experience. We do a little bit of RPA. Actually, some of our friends, OSS side, they are also famous for locking down the customer, not only the hardware vendors, but the software vendors also in the same boat. So we have a customer where they had on a regular basis a cable cut, and they want to go across multiple OSS, BSS domains and get the information. If you want to do it, the traditional way of system integration, you have to spend a lot of money, tons of money to actually make that happen. So what we've done with RPA is we actually go in and doing a GUI scrapping and get the data. That's what we call soft integration. It's very easy to do, and it saves them a lot of money. So the reason why we're bringing up RPA is because edge computing was mentioned a couple of times. I think edge computing, in the context of edge computing, if you're talking about in the United States, only we have 200,000 towers, and if 5G, God forbid, ever goes live, or we would have the edge computing side, we would have about 2 million sites. That's the estimates we have. So 2 million sites, there is no way we can manage 2 million sites manually anymore. So that has to happen via cell sites for mini tower. So that's what we call swarm intelligence. Actually, there are some studies happening on swarm intelligence, which is next level of cloud-based RPA. So those are the buzzwords as I was saying. But the reality is we need some sort of automation, and automation will be key for us in the future. So now, how is that related to this number, 3,000? Any guess? No. 3,000 is the number of code developed first time for Bitcoin, for blockchain, the first, and that's the total number of code written in blockchain. It was developed 11 years ago. No one knows exactly who that gentleman was, who wrote it or came up with the white paper, but there are speculations and here and there, but the technology behind it evolved over time. And people often talk about the blockchain, there is no such a thing that the blockchain. There are blockchains, and there are collaboration between blockchains. So that's what we want to convey to all customers and partners, that there is no, there are different platforms, Hyperledger, there are Ethernet consortium. They are trying to work together. But the notion that financial industries is starting to get it, I mean, we have to understand that, we talk about banks and governments who are losing power and control. So they would not like to see something bypassing them as far as taxes go. So that's why blockchain is not as effective as it could be. There are other issues with blockchain. Scalability is number one. But the notion that blockchain allows you to collaborate with your competitors, I think that's the novum idea behind blockchain. That's what we like it. That's what many people who have been competitors in the past trying to understand, that actually with blockchain we can do a lot more things together. And it starts with the API. Dan was talking about East-West interfaces. That's where we see a potential interaction between many service providers, not just service providers. If you're talking about service providers in general, and understanding that WhatsApp is no longer an exception. I do oftentimes conference call with WhatsApp between Singapore, India, and United States. So I think this is more than killing the service providers right now. The new generation of service providers, the so-called digital service providers, obviously they need different services, and they have to introduce different services. They are working on it, but also they need different set of operation support system. But because the operation support system created for them 20 years ago was for voice, was never meant to be for data, and was never meant to be to manage 320 terabytes of data on a daily basis, right? So that's what one of the smaller networks, actually AT&T is saying that they have about 242 petabytes of data only in their core network. So that's a lot of data, and OSS was never meant to do that, right? So that's why we need the next generation of OSS. That's why we need a combination of what we believe is blockchain, because no one can really manage this amount of data anymore. If you're talking about IoT and industrial IoT, you have millions of devices. Not AT&T, not Verizon, nobody can on its own manage all these devices. Even Amazon and Facebook cannot, probably. So we have to collaborate together. We have to get together, and this is no longer about competition. If you want to collaborate, we have to start sharing data and sharing data back and forth. So which brings me to the automation. So how is automation working in the context of blockchain? So if you look at, for instance, what we did, in terms of our first proof of concept after we started this initiative, we were working with one big service providers in Asia Pac, and they have 7 different subsidiaries. And all of these subsidiaries, they were running all their accounting on their own, accounting, resource management, and everything. So what we did is we created a hyper automation domain across all domains. So end-to-end services between service providers within the service provider. That's what's practically the use case. And that's what we did automatically. As we know, if you're dealing with service providers, getting this contract signed is taking more than 2 years. So that's part of the problem Joanne was talking about before. That's why we cannot publicly talk about it. But the use case we solved is really allocating resources dynamically to wherever you need it, not just to over-subscription or over-provision. So, a couple of use cases we have seen already in blockchain space and automation. Again, if you're talking about untrusted partner, there are multiple use cases where you can solve the issue with blockchain. We're talking about permission-based, permissionless. So those are public, blockchain pieces which can collaborate across multiple parties. Again, the settlement, that I think this is a part when everyone sees that, there's a company called Clear. They are doing a very good job on blockchain-based settlement between carriers. Nothing new, and PCCW has been part of it. I think Verizon was part of it, as well as Colt. I think that the use case was mentioned before. Blockchain was piece of it, which was solving the settlement. But what we are talking about is truly revolutionizing and changing OSS BSS. So if you're talking about BSS, a 35 billion market, predominantly by shared between a couple of players. If you look at that market and how settlement of IoT devices, of any digital service or any future service can be done in the future, they're going to lose a lot of money, right? It's not about talking about open source, own app, and OSM. This is not the discussion. I think the discussion is about how we collaboratively go into this new future market, because no one can really manage all these devices on its own, right? So settlement, billing, settlement of invoices, I think, creating a smart contract, that's what we have proven in our proof of concept. You can actually create end-to-end service across multiple domains and settle the invoices on the fly. There is no need to send digital invoices, and get the consents of the customer or the other side. You can settle it down on the fly. So that's the power of what we see with blockchain is coming, is probably, as a train which we cannot stop, which we believe is going to help a lot of service providers in terms of their daily operations. The daily operations are massive, but using blockchain may actually help them to reduce some of the effort. As Ibrahim from the CTO from TELUS was saying during telemanagement from last year, he said, well, we get all these nice whistles from VNF, NFE, and you name it, but it's like IP 20 years ago, and some of you guys are probably not old enough to know what IP was doing there. But the saying was, do you have anybody from Cisco here? No? Doing some Cisco bashing. So the saying was, you deploy actually one IP switch from Cisco and you hire 20 engineers. That's how bad it was to operate actually a Cisco switch. The same notion is happening right now with NFEs. You not as bad maybe, but similar, where you actually deploy NFE, and from the operational perspective, some of the operational orchestration platforms, they don't even consider the closed loop automation. So if you're using a public cloud from EC2, and that goes down, how do you know you have to fire up another one? Spinning up another, I'm not saying this is impossible, I'm just saying this is the status quo right now. So managing actually operationally NFV and SDN, that's the dream we are all talking about, and sharing those resources on the fly, that's what blockchain automation can do. Okay, so I talked about resources, sharing resources, multi-service providers. We believe we are at the beginning of the journey with blockchain. Blockchain is just starting, and is not, as I said, not one blockchain. We see already blockchains of blockchains happening, side chains, daughter chains, all kind of chains. So what we do is we have our infrastructure, actually, some of our blockchain is running on Amazon, and we do have a market share. We can actually start sharing resources on our market share with customers. I think that's pretty much it. Then I give you more time to speak more if you want. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Very intriguing presentation, thank you. Can you disclose any carriers that are experimenting with blockchain, and in particular for IoT, where it's been talked about a lot as a ledger to keep track of the thousands, millions of devices?
Right. So I can actually, because we are not doing it with them. So Deutsche Telekom would be one of them. There is as one of the platforms I was mentioning, one of them is called IOTA. IOTA is a consortium created in Europe, and the driving engine behind it is Bosch and Volkswagen and some other guys, but also Deutsche Telekom joined the consortium. If you're talking about transaction volume, that's just give you an idea. If you're talking about Visa transaction, I think we were talking about 50,000 to 70,000 transactions per second. The toughest one, and then the most competitive one on supercomputing and whatever you want to call it, the parameter can change, have been between 500 and 1,000 transactions per second, which is not even close to what you're talking about in terms of IoT. What's that?
How can that be handled today?
No, that's why. They call it fact and fiction, marketing aspect. We actually created our own hyperledger, which is a hierarchical hyperledger. And we are not saying we are even anywhere close to IoT, but we are scalable to the level where we can actually deploy it for the telco environment. So I was talking to another gentleman who was telling me that they have done some interesting blockchain in production in UIA, So I asked him how many users do they have. They had 4 users. So that gives you the perspective of what is fact, what is fiction. Okay, so there are clearly, advantages. We talked about the slicing of say it again.
Is Deutsche Telekom the only one?
No. There are actually, I don't think there are any.
Any carrier just deploying IoT should be looking at it.
Right, but again, actually, in terms of monetization of IoT devices and data, that's what everyone is looking at IOTA, because IOTA came with the promise of solving this issue. So they, today, and again, I'm not doing any hyperscale bashing, forgive me, I'm talking about Facebook. If you compare Facebook to Deutsche Telekom or telecom service providers, they have the perception still in the market that they are the guardian of their data, right? They're not going to sell the data. But if you compare it to Facebook would sell your data probably to someone else. That's what the business case was for telcos, to say, okay, now we're going to roll out the IoT and we're going to monetize the data based on IoT, based on blockchain. So, but again, unfortunately, the problem I see with most of the blockchain initiatives is those kids who are developing actually those software pieces, they are mostly 18 to 25 years old, and they are very dynamic in terms of starting a new adventure. So their commitment level to doing something and finishing it is not really there. And that's really the issue with IOTA, because those kids are really geniuses, but you can't put them into one single room. So that's why IOTA in general is taking longer than I expected. There is actually a Bosch lab connectivity lab in Chicago where we visited recently. They showed us the Tangle, which what is called is the level of the agreement between the ledgers and how the blocks is working. The consensus was not working more than 500. That's what they showed us live. So that would be the ideal scenario we would get there. Okay? No worries.